While others are going to the drinks at the moment, here we have the diehards who are really interested in decarbonizing the industry through hydrogen. This session was about to be scheduled yesterday, but it is delayed to today. So I'm very happy that you are here to listen to us. We have a very interesting panel here that we're going to discuss the options that the H-Vision project will provide. But before that, we'll have an interesting speech of TNO, who is going to show us what the options are. My name is Alice Krecht. I'm from Delta Links. Delta Links represents the companies that are located in the port of Rotterdam. And the climate change, obviously, is a very important issue for us. So we really work hard to reach the climate goals together with the companies that are located in the port. Maybe first to check the people that are here, could you raise your hand and say if you are from the Netherlands or if you're not? So who is from the Netherlands or who is from abroad? The Netherlands? Okay. So not all familiar with the Dutch, and some are hesitating still. Okay, yeah, interesting. But okay, so that is good for us to know, to see that they're not all familiar with the Dutch situation. Well, let's start with the keynote speech here. Can I invite René Peters on stage? René, you are leader of the hydrogen and offshore wind team in the Netherlands, and you will lead us through these options.
I'll give an introduction why I think the Netherlands is in a unique position to help to decarbonize and abate the difficult industries in the Netherlands.
So for all those are not from the Netherlands, here and
okay, thank you very much.
Inspired.
And great that you stay until the end of today. Normally we say bear with us, but I think we have a great discussion and program ahead, so please stay until the end. I'm asked to present the options to decarbonize the hard-to-abate industries in the Netherlands. And we have quite a lot, and I would like to show why we are, I think, in a unique position in the Netherlands, not only with our industries, but also with our vast opportunities in the North Sea to actually bring renewable energy to the industry cluster to help to decarbonize the industry. And I will discuss a little bit the opportunities there are, but also how the North Sea transition actually facilitates this decarbonization of the industry. Because the industry is one of the main contributors of CO2 emissions in the Netherlands. Some 40% of the total emissions is related to 5 industrial clusters in the Netherlands, of which 4 of them are very close to shore. So they're connected to harbor regions, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Groningen, Delfzijl, but also Zeeland. And there's quite some energy-intensive industries which also have quite a strong CO2 footprint. And they have challenges to reduce these CO2 emissions. And on top of that, we have a 5th cluster in the south, Camelot cluster, which is a strong chemistry cluster with a strong CO2 emission as well. What are the options for these industries, which are 40% of the total emissions? I think there are 3 main options for them to decarbonize. It's carbon capture and storage, and some of the industries, think about the cement industry, steel manufacturer, they are CO2 emitters, which is core in their processes. So they need carbon capture and storage to get rid of their emissions. Think about electrification. For example, Dow and Shell, they're looking at electric cracking technology, which will demand huge amounts of electricity. And electrification could, of course, help a lot of industries to get rid of gas for high temperature processes, steam production, and so on. But there's also a great part of the industry which needs very high temperature processes, which needs hydrogen as a feedstock for their processes, like the chemical industry, ammonia production, for fertilizer production or refining, which needs hydrogen as a feedstock. And that's where hydrogen, green hydrogen, or also blue hydrogen, are really a great option for decarbonization, and we'll discuss it later in the panel for the case of Rotterdam. And why does that link so much with the transition that we have at the North Sea? Because actually the North Sea will enable all these 3 transitions by providing options for providing green electricity from offshore wind, obviously, green hydrogen from offshore wind and then converted to hydrogen, or CO2 storage options for direct capture of CO2 or capturing the CO2 from blue hydrogen facilities, which is then stored in the depleted gas fields. So as you know probably, the Netherlands has a huge ambition to develop offshore wind up to 21 gigawatts in 2030 and even up to 70 gigawatts in 2050, which is well beyond the amount of electricity that is used for direct electricity use in industry and households, and we expect the rest to be converted to green hydrogen. And also on the longer term, we expect hydrogen to be produced in an offshore environment, so combined with offshore wind parks, direct hydrogen production, and then transferred directly to the industry clusters to be used for decarbonization. Now, I already mentioned the vast ambitions for offshore hydrogen, offshore wind development, and derived from that offshore hydrogen production. And as you can see in the Netherlands, we're one of the countries around the North Sea with the highest ambitions on wind deployment. Here it says 60 gigawatts, which is the official plans, but the capacity is even, potential is even up to 72 gigawatts to be deployed in the Dutch offshore sector, which is more or less comparable with the ambitions of the UK. And as you can see, the purple blocks are actually the blocks where the wind parks are already developed or nominated to be developed in the next 5 years or 10 years. But the light purple blocks are actually the developments beyond 2030, which will actually be more than 100 kilometers offshore, and where offshore hydrogen production probably is the most economic way of bringing all that energy to shore. And at the same time, we're developing the North Sea as an area where large-scale CO2 storage will be developed, which is needed either to capture the CO2 from the heavy industry like steel production or cement and store it offshore, or to facilitate blue hydrogen production, for example in Rotterdam or also in the Den Helder area. So carbon capture and storage there's sufficient storage capacity in the depleted gas fields in the Netherlands, about 1,800 megatons, which would be sufficient for the next, many decades to come. At the moment, it's also the lowest cost option for CO2 reduction until 2030, which makes it the most attractive option for the CO2 reduction for industry. And as I said, it's also needed for blue hydrogen implementation and deployment, and on the long term it can also enable negative emissions, which is necessary beyond 2050. And as a big advantage, there's also a huge offshore infrastructure available, a lot of pipelines, about 2,500 kilometers of offshore pipeline available for alternative use, which could be either for CO2 transport or hydrogen transport to bring the CO2 to the depleted gas fields offshore. And there's actually two big projects already underway, Porthos project and Aramis, both in Rotterdam. And of course on blue hydrogen, I didn't mention it here, but H-Vision in Rotterdam, obviously, and the H2 Gateway in Den Helder to bring the CO2 to store in the offshore. Now, if you look at offshore wind and the deployment and the connection of offshore wind to shore, it gets increasingly complicated to get all the electricity via power cables and high voltage DC to shore and connected to the onshore grid. This is a map from a study where the future wind parks could be connected to the onshore grid. And as you can see, the connections to the near shore network is very limited, and the future connections needs to be connected further inland, which makes it more and more complicated to get these wind parks developed and connected via power connections. So in the future, and that's the picture on the right, we may want to reuse the gas infrastructure, which is currently there. So the different colors, which could be retrofitted for hydrogen transport produced from offshore wind, which is particularly attractive if you go to far offshore wind parks and transport this energy in the form of hydrogen to shore with quite a high capacity. So what do we see in the future? On the North Sea, we will transition from a traditional oil and gas production area, and probably that will be extended for a few years now with a strong interest to extend gas production from the North Sea. We will maybe electrify these platforms to reduce CO2 emissions, but also NOx emissions from offshore wind connections and connections to the grid. And after that, we expect carbon capture and storage will be deployed at large scale, with a lot of projects already underway and under planning in the next 5 to 20 years to store CO2, to reduce the CO2 footprint of the heavy industries for the next decade to come, and to realize the 2030 ambitions of our climate targets. And then on the longer term, we expect hydrogen conversion, green hydrogen conversion, to be realized for the next 20 years again, where offshore wind will be converted to hydrogen and then transported to shore via the new or existing pipelines, connecting to the industry clusters and helping the industry clusters to decarbonize. And actually this offshore grid then could be connected to the onshore hydrogen backbone that you may have heard of. The hydrogen backbone is actually the conversion of the national gas grid in the Netherlands for hydrogen transport. It will connect all the main industry clusters in the Netherlands, and the offshore grid can be used to feed the hydrogen backbone with green hydrogen from offshore wind, and it can also, the other parts of the system can be used to actually bring the CO2 back to the offshore depleted fields. Now, how much are we talking about? It's good to have a little bit an idea about volumes and the amounts that we need. So we are using now about 1.5 megatons of hydrogen. If you want to produce that all from offshore wind, you will need about 15 gigawatt of offshore wind power to produce the green hydrogen. So that will take quite a while before we had those volumes of hydrogen from green sources to be used in the industry. And that means for the first decade to come, until 2030 and beyond, we will also need the blue hydrogen to make sure that the industry could decarbonize without having to wait for the green hydrogen to be at a significant level of volume to be implemented for decarbonization. Now, there's a lot of question and discussion about how much hydrogen do we need in the future, because at the moment we have about 180 petajoule of hydrogen use, mostly grey hydrogen in the Netherlands. And there have been studies done on what is different scenarios on how much hydrogen will be used in industry sector, in the households, in mobility, even in the future synthetic fuel business, e-kerosene, diesel and so on. And you can see that many scenarios differ in their ambitions and their expectations on volumes, but all of them are far beyond the current level of 180 petajoule. And I see it's a little bit scrambled, but basically all scenarios expect that there's a high volume expected for hydrogen use in the industry cluster. On mobility and households, the expectations are much different and much smaller. And the big wildcard for the future is the use of green hydrogen for synthetic fuels for the future. And that's of course a big uncertainty whether all these activities will land in the Netherlands or Northwest Europe or elsewhere in the world. Then on hydrogen, we all know most of the hydrogen at the moment is grey. We will go to green on the long term with all this offshore wind deployment and also importing green hydrogen. But the question is there an important role for blue hydrogen in between? And we think there is for various reasons. First of all, it's the fastest way to start the hydrogen economy at a volume, also with a relative low cost compared to green hydrogen. And it's also a great way, and we will discuss it for the H-Vision project, to actually reuse the refinery gases which are currently used in the refineries for heating, and use it as a source for blue hydrogen, capturing the CO2 and directly reduce CO2 emissions from the industry. So we think blue hydrogen will play an important role for the next decade to come, and slowly green hydrogen will follow and build up to play an important role beyond 2030 towards 2040. And that's it for the introduction. I think we have to go to the discussion and the panel debate, and I hand it over to Alice. Thank you.
Thank you, René, for this clear introduction. Yeah, you can take a seat if you want. But maybe first one question. Are there sometimes companies that come to you and ask for the silver bullet? And could you...
Yes.
And
they come regularly.
What is your response then?
Well, yeah. Well, there is no silver bullet, I think.
Oh.
If there would be a silver bullet, we have had it. And it's often said, okay, green hydrogen is the silver bullet, so let's go for green hydrogen and forget about the rest. And I don't think that's an answer either. Also because at the moment, if you want to produce the green hydrogen from electricity, the electricity is not fully renewable either, and we also need to replace our electric grid with green electricity first, before you can really reduce CO2 emissions with green hydrogen. So in between, blue hydrogen could play a great role. So I think don't think there's a single silver bullet. We need all options.
And during time, maybe the business cases will change and the availability will change.
I see a bright future for green hydrogen on the longer term, but for the next 10 years we also need the blue hydrogen.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we'll discuss later more. We will look at this H-Vision movie now to dive into the project, and after that I will ask the panelists to come on stage and we'll have more discussion. I will join you there while the film is turning.
Om bij te dragen aan de afspraken in het Nederlandse klimaatakkoord en de Fit for 55-plannen van de EU, wil de industrie in Nederland de CO2-uitstoot fors omlaag brengen. Voor processen die veel warmte nodig hebben, moet een overstap gemaakt worden van fossiele brandstoffen naar waterstof. Maar om de doelen voor 2030 te kunnen halen, zijn hiervan al op korte termijn grote hoeveelheden nodig. Met H-Vision kan dit. H-Vision heeft een uniek en onderscheidend proces ontworpen waarbij waterstof gemaakt wordt van voornamelijk raffinaderijgassen. Dit werkt als volgt. Bij het raffineren van olie komen gassen vrij. Deze worden afgevangen en als brandstof gebruikt in het raffinageproces. Bij de verbranding van deze gassen komt CO2 vrij. H-Vision vervoert deze raffinaderijgassen naar een centrale locatie waar er waterstof van wordt gemaakt. De CO2 die in dat proces vrijkomt wordt opgevangen en getransporteerd naar lege gasvelden onder de Noordzee. De uit de raffinaderijgassen gemaakte CO2-arme waterstof wordt vervolgens weer gebruikt als brandstof in het raffinageproces. Op deze manier dalen de CO2-emissies van de bij H-Vision aangesloten raffinaderijen fors en zijn fabrieken en infrastructuur alvast voorbereid op een waterstofeconomie. De waterstofproductie van H-Vision is gebaseerd op bewezen technologie en kan daarom al op korte termijn tot industriële schaal worden opgeschaald en ingezet. Ook op de lange termijn blijft H-Vision een bijdrage aan een klimaatneutraal energiesysteem bieden. H-Vision is voorbereid op de brandstoffen- en grondstoffentransitie in de chemie. Als de sector overstapt van aardolie naar biogene grondstoffen, kunnen ook de hierbij vrijkomende restgassen verwerkt worden tot waterstof. Dit leidt in het productieproces zelfs tot netto negatieve emissies. En wanneer CO2-vrij waterstof een vlucht genomen heeft, kan H-Vision in die periodes dat het minder waait, ingezet worden om het tekort aan te vullen. De ontwikkeling van een waterstofsysteem is een gezamenlijke opgave, in Nederland en in Europa. In H-Vision is een flink aantal partners in de waterstofketen verenigd om deze op gang te brengen, met ruimte voor nog meer afnemers. Maar ook breder worden de handen in elkaar geslagen. Zo werkt het havenbedrijf Rotterdam met partners aan de komst van een grootschalig waterstofnetwerk door het havencomplex en bereidt H-Vision zich voor op aansluiting op de landelijke waterstofbackbone. Hiermee wordt Rotterdam een internationaal knooppunt richting andere landen in Noordwest-Europa. Met H-Vision kan de industrie een sprint maken om de klimaatdoelen te halen.
It's as simple as that, as it looks. I would like to invite, oh, you are already coming. Okay, I would like to invite the panelists at stage. They're very enthusiastic. Because we are now going to dive into the details of this project for a little while, about the economics, the finance and the regulatory. And therefore I have Mark Zwart here from Shell, Feitje Wittemans from Vopak, and from Berenschot is Wouter Verbeek, and of course René Peters, who already introduced us. So welcome here. And let's try to give a little hand for them. Maybe to see, yeah. Great. So you're most welcome here. Maybe just let's start with you, Wouter. You were very enthusiastic, so let's start with you also in the discussion. You work at Berenschot, which is a consulting company in the Netherlands, and you're an economist, senior economist. And what type of project do you work?
Yeah, I
currently?
normally work on a lot of projects related to the industry. So this is a project, the H-Vision project, but I've also worked on using exchange heat of in the Rotterdam harbor area as well for heating of households, for example. And I've also worked on green hydrogen and the direct coupling of electrolyzers to wind turbines.
It's always about the money, of course, in all
It's
those projects.
always a little bit about the money and about the technical aspects, and I try to combine them. So I build a lot of business cases in practice.
And with your CV, that is easy because you are technical, studied engineering, and also economist. So the perfect guy for that. But which, looking at listening to the presentation of René Peters, which silver bullet would you then suggest for the companies that ask for you? Do you agree with the abatement curve that he provided in his presentation?
Yeah, I agree with the curve and the path that René sketches. But what I also think is that the solutions that are most suitable and have the best business case are really dependent on the specific industry and specific configurations of plants. So for example, if you have a lot of stacks with exhaust gases, with low carbon concentrations, or you need high temperatures, then you really need a different solution. So the business case also is really site specific. So it's really important to make a good analysis of the technical and economic feasibility to see what is the best solution. So in some cases, for example, a post-combustion route can be best, but in other cases, like the H-Vision case, where we have a lot of stacks and very low concentrated exhaust, their pre-combustion route is a better and more economically feasible solution. So it's really site-specific.
Okay. Now, let's take this for the answer for now, but we will dive more into it. Feikje, you work at Vopak, and your role in the project is the leader of the infrastructure group. And what is can you explain to the group here which infrastructure is needed? Hydrogen infrastructure, I suppose?
Yeah.
For the
There
project?
is 3 types of pipelines we need. It's the pipelines between the production plant, the hydrogen production plant, and the users. There is, first of all, there is the refinery fuel gas pipeline, which goes from the users to the production plant of the hydrogen. Then there is a hydrogen pipeline, which goes back from the production plant of the hydrogen to the users. And of course, there is a CO2 connection pipeline to the, for instance, the onshore pipeline of Porthos.
The storage
From
of
the
CO2?
for the storage of the CO2, and that goes from the production plant of the hydrogen, of course, to the onshore pipeline.
So that's a lot. And you try to link that up, of course, with the facilities, with the storage capacity. And I think you want to make it as efficient as possible, just to make it as small as possible, to make the business case feasible? Or do you think we need to...
Yeah, we could actually, we are thinking of over-dimensioning the pipelines a little bit, so that also third parties outside of the consortium can actually have access to the facilities. So that would not, that would broaden the project to third parties as well.
Sounds wise, because I think we need a lot of capacity in the future. Listening to the presentation of René.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Maybe for now. And Mark Zwart from Shell. You are at the advocacy team of the project, and that's your role in the project. And what other topics are you working on?
Yeah, so indeed. Does my microphone work? Yeah. So I'm in the corporate relations team of Shell Nederland, and in that role I'm involved in many projects that are there to help our own industry to decarbonize, but also other industry. So one of the big projects there is the H-Vision project, but there are also projects like the Aramis project that René was already showing on the screen, the carbon capture and storage project, but also the Rhine Corridor projects, where we look together with partners at making a big infrastructure for both hydrogen and CO2.
And does this presentation that René provided link up with your plans as a company? Because you have all these options, I think, also in place.
Yes, I think I completely agree with René that there's not one silver bullet. In fact, we need all the bullets that we have, because 2030 is around the corner. There's been a long while we are already talking about meeting the 2030 targets, but that date comes closer and closer, and we simply cannot afford to lose out or to drop any of the options. You can also see that in the IPCC report. So I think the H-Vision project is a very important project, also for us as Shell.
Yeah.
Just to illustrate, I think with the H-Vision technology, we can reduce the CO2 emission of our Pernis refinery by 25%, which is basically half of the target that we've set for 2030.
That's a lot. Yeah. And maybe I think a big part of your work is to try to be involved in the regulation that is being developed. So what kind of regulation is on top of your list that should be changed, or what kind of policy ask?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that we need to get arranged, and I think what was top on the list, and I'm certainly not the only one having been involved in that, is the SDE subsidy for that we finally got granted. That's a very big success, and you better ask Wouter about the contents of the regulation, but that is key because a project like H-Vision, it's a brilliant concept, but it's also a costly concept. So you need quite some help to make that fly. So I think that was a big point of attention. And other things are around the regulation of the market. So low carbon hydrogen is not the same as the hydrogen that you produce through electrolysis. So on the production side, there's a lot of difference, but also on the demand side, certain industries need different hydrogen than others.
Yeah.
So we need room to get the H-Vision type of hydrogen, including the infrastructure, to get that going, also from a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, and I think we are moving ahead to the right direction in that sense. But Wouter, do you want to add something about the business cases for the projects?
Yeah. I think the main, real something we have achieved lately is that now there is a certain category in the largest Dutch subsidy scheme. That's the SDE++ subsidy scheme. And now at least we can get subsidy for decarbonizing our fuel, so making hydrogen from refinery fuel gases. And that's a main advantage. Of course, there are also some caveats in there, so we are now really looking into this, whether it is sufficient to get our business case running. So we're now checking the latest numbers.
And maybe the Dutch guy here in front, he left. So René, what could maybe this is another type of question. What could the other countries learn from the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think where we are quite strong in is building the complete value chain. So not just looking into what is this plant need for decarbonization, but how do we link it to the need of infrastructure development? You mentioned hydrogen, CO2, which is needed to actually provide security of supply for the new carriers or the getting rid of the CO2. And also the source of it, providing a reliable production of green hydrogen or electricity or storage of CO2. So you have to look into new value chains. And I think we're doing that quite well in the Netherlands. We're quite flexible in bringing the parties together who can build this full value chain to make a transition possible. That's what I see where the Netherlands is quite strong in, actually, if you compare it to other countries.
That is, I think, what all of you are working on as well. And maybe looking at the infrastructure, you are actually a concrete chain in the value chain. So how do you stay connected as Vopak with other projects and applies of demands that are there in the value chain?
Well, what we believe is that you need a full value chain, a full supply chain, entire. And we usually do it worldwide. We're looking at supply chains. So we decide where we need our terminals, where buffering is needed, etc. And actually, this is the same. So we see that there is a need for infrastructure. Actually, as Vopak, we have quite some experience in operating infrastructure. We have 200 kilometers of pipelines already in the port of Rotterdam, connecting all of our terminals with most of the refineries. And that's the key. And the thing is, if you have to start somewhere, and that's the nice thing about H-Vision, that you can immediately fill the hydrogen infrastructure with molecules. Mm-hmm. If you have green hydrogen, it takes a lot of time before it's filled. So this is very good to have this additional hydrogen infrastructure in place, also for the redundancy of the hydrogen backbone. So if in the future, all industries are switched over to hydrogen, you don't want to live with only one hydrogen pipeline, because if there's an issue with it, everybody is in trouble. So that's also where the societal value of this infrastructure is very relevant.
Mm. Yes, I completely agree with you. And when we look at this interaction between all these projects, Wouter, if you work on a business case, I think there are all separate business cases that are interacted together. So how do you link those up? And
this is always a little kind of a recurring theme in how we model those business cases. But the main approach that we've chosen, I think that's a really good approach, that's modeling an integral business case. So we have modeled the integral value chain, and that means that there are companies who are selling their refinery fuel gas, getting back hydrogen. So we model the entire value chain to really get an integral business case and also present that to the ministry to see what we're doing. And what we're also now doing is splitting out it in certain entities and looking at the individual business cases. So that's actually have been the approach till now.
Okay, so that is it keeps being a challenge, but
it's always a challenge. But I think the nice thing is that we are all working together on one model. So we have also, let's say, one common truth that we can discuss with each other, and that helps a lot. Instead of that everyone has its own business case with its own viewpoints. So that has been successful till now.
So let's now zoom out a little bit more. And then I have one question that always is asked to me as well, and I'd love to ask it to someone else. Mark, how can we prevent a lock-in with this project?
Well, there is no lock-in. So you don't have to prevent it, because I think the H-Vision as technology, the good thing about it is that fuel gases from chemical plants and refineries will be there, like it was shown in the film. Also, when you gradually green up your feedstock, you will continue to have residual gases that you need to do something with, because they have a heating value. So the nice thing about it is you then continue operating your H-Vision plant, you continue to produce hydrogen, store the CO2, but the effect of storing is that you get negative emissions. So that's the good thing about it. And even if you would even think a bit further ahead, you could even convert an H-Vision plant into producing something else than low carbon hydrogen. So I think it's a good thing. And another advantage is that at least certainly in the first decade, I would say, you can free up the green hydrogen that still has to start up big time. We talk a lot about it, we all want it, but the big plants still have to come. That you can use the green hydrogen for purposes where it's needed more than in chemical plants.
Okay, well, that was a very clear answer. And then, being this the fact, René, what can other countries should also implement this?
Sorry, what can other countries?
Other countries should also implement this because it's not a lock-in; it's only benefits. Which countries are interested? Should be
For the
interested
blue
in
hydrogen
this blue
development.
hydrogen in the
Yeah.
refinery fuel gas?
Well, I think UK has very ambitious plans also to develop blue hydrogen plants. They have great conditions as well, similar to the Netherlands, for storing CO2 in the depleted gas fields, reuse infrastructure, and also they have a few industry clusters very close to shore, which are at the same situation actually as
also
the Netherlands.
based on refinery fuel gas?
Yes, there could be good options there, obviously. I think Germany could benefit as well, but Germany has some kind of opposition against CO2 capture and storage, so as a result, blue hydrogen. Want to go to green immediately. I think they could benefit of it as well, probably, but maybe if we can develop the Delta corridor to bring the CO2 to Rotterdam, store it in the Dutch subsurface, that could help them to convince to also choose for blue hydrogen in some cases. So I think there's many countries, and not to forget Norway, of course. Norway is very ambitious to play a strong role in blue hydrogen production, either in Norway or send the gas and then take the CO2 back to Norway. So they're very much promoting blue hydrogen as a solution in this transition phase.
And maybe also industrial clusters like, for instance, in Italy, who have refinery fuel gases, who could use this concept.
Yeah, and there's also, at the moment, I think for steel it's also very interesting. At the moment, they're running on coal, and their first phase is to go to natural gas, create syngas to use as a reducer, and then on the long term go to grey. So they also can use in this transition phase also blue hydrogen for the reduction of iron ore, and then slowly convert to green hydrogen. So I think there's much more applications for the blue hydrogen in the industries.
Very good. I'm looking at the clock and we're almost at the end, the final closing remarks of this session. Maybe I just want to step by to you and see what is the final topics that you would like to address. Mark, what do you think would be the thing that really people should keep in their heads when they go home and think about this session and this project? What would be the game changers?
Yeah, maybe it's a repetition of what I said, but I think producing hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen from residual gases, I would think it's a no-brainer. I think we have to go for it. Not having said anything about green, because we have to, without any delay, have to move on with green as well. Yeah. So we need everything.
Okay, so I hope we did some advocacy here then. And Feitje, you.
Yeah, what we are doing or planning to do is to develop infrastructure which is actually private infrastructure. So what I would like to avoid, what would help us, is that over-regulation by the European Commission is avoided for these private networks, also beyond 2030. Because if it is over-regulated and the same rules go as the current, for instance, gas infrastructure, then I don't think private parties are willing to invest in this kind of
over-regulation. Thank you. And what would be your final remark, Wouter?
Yeah, I think my final remark would be that in certain configurations it's best to work together, to collaborate, because what we see in the H-Vision project is the fact that we are collaborating leads to a more cost-effective solution than if each of those parties on its own had developed their own solutions. So, yeah, I would say a benefit from collaborating from other industries. That helps.
Those are wise words spoken by an economist. Very good, thank you. René, first word
Yeah,
from
I
you,
think
and then final
my
remark.
last message, and again stressing the fact that hydrogen, whatever color it is, outside gray of course, we will need it, and they're not in competition with one another. So we need green, we need blue. It's not either or, it's and. And they can actually help one another to accelerate the hydrogen economy and the CO2 reduction targets to be realized. There's no such thing as a lock-in, fully agree with Mark, not on the gas side and also not on the hydrogen side. So we need all, blue and green.
Thank you. Well, that is a beautiful closing remark. And mostly I need to thank the audience that is here, that has the Ausdauer, to say it in German, to be at this final moment of the sessions. And I would like to thank the panelists. I think I have a bottle of wine somewhere for them, but we will give it later.
Yeah.
I will after we shut down the camera. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again. And if you have questions, please come to me or the panelists.